My sister keeps using her emergency key to borrow my stuff and let her friends stay at my place without permission. Hi everyone. Today's story will blow your mind, but real quick, if you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button. Channel's been a bit quiet lately, and your support keeps it all going. Let's jump in. I'm a 25-year-old guy who's been living in my own apartment for about 2 years now. I worked hard to get this place, saved up for the deposit while finishing college, landed a decent job in marketing, and finally felt like I was establishing myself as an independent adult. When I first moved in, my parents insisted I give them an emergency key, just in case. At the time, it seemed reasonable. What if I locked myself out? What if there was a water leak while I was on vacation? I agreed, but made it clear the key was for genuine emergencies only. Fast forward to about 6 months ago, when my younger sister Emily, 20F, moved back home after her dorm situation didn't work out. She's attending college about 30 minutes from my apartment, and I was happy to help her out occasionally, letting her study at my place when our parents' house was too chaotic, or crash on my couch once in a while when she had early classes. That's where the trouble started. What began as occasional visits quickly evolved into Emily treating my apartment like her personal crash pad. At first, it was just her showing up unannounced. Annoying, but manageable. Then I started noticing small things going missing: my portable charger, my favorite hoodie, kitchen gadgets. When confronted, she'd always say she was just borrowing and would return everything soon. She rarely did. The situation reached a breaking point last weekend. I had been visiting a friend out of town and came home Sunday evening to find 3 people I'd never met before lounging in my living room, eating my food, and watching my TV. Emily wasn't even there. She had apparently given these complete strangers access to my apartment and then left for a date. I was livid. After kicking them out, I called Emily, who acted like I was overreacting. They're just my friends from biochem class. We needed a quiet place to study, and then they got hungry. What's the big deal? When I explained that giving strangers unsupervised access to my home was absolutely unacceptable, she scoffed and said, "It's not like they stole anything. Besides, Mom and Dad said it was fine." That was news to me. I immediately called my parents, assuming they'd be on my side. I was wrong. My mom said, "Oh James, don't be so dramatic. Emily said they needed somewhere to study, and your place was empty anyway. What's the harm in helping your sister out?" I tried explaining about boundaries and privacy and how it's literally my home that I pay for, but they brushed me off. My dad even chimed in with, "Family helps family. Your sister needs support right now." I'm at my wit's end. This isn't about not wanting to help my sister. It's about her completely disregarding my boundaries and my parents enabling this behavior. I've tried talking to them rationally, but they don't seem to understand why I'm upset. Has anyone dealt with family members who don't respect boundaries like this? How do I make them understand that my apartment isn't a free hotel for Emily and her friends? Update: I changed my locks after finding strangers in my apartment again, and my family is furious. First of all, thank you to everyone who responded to my original post. Reading your comments made me realize I wasn't crazy for being upset about my sister's behavior. Unfortunately, things escalated quickly after my first post. Despite our conversation and my explicit request that Emily stop using her emergency key except for actual emergencies, she did it again. 3 days after our argument, I came home from work to find Emily and 2 different friends in my apartment. They had ordered pizza, were using my gaming system, and Emily was wearing my favorite sweater, the one I had specifically asked her to stop borrowing, because it was expensive and she kept returning it with stains. When I asked what they were doing there, Emily rolled her eyes and said, "Chill out. We were just hanging out between classes. It's not like you were using the place." I kept my cool and asked her friends to leave so we could talk privately. Once they were gone, I calmly explained, again, that she couldn't keep using my apartment without permission. Her response: "Mom and Dad gave me the key, so technically I have permission to be here whenever I want." That was the last straw. The next day, I called a locksmith and had all my locks changed. I didn't tell anyone in my family what I was doing, I just did it. Of course, it didn't take long for them to find out. Yesterday, Emily apparently tried to get into my apartment while I was at work and couldn't. She immediately called our parents, who then bombarded my phone with calls and texts. When I finally answered, my mom was hysterical. "How could you change the locks without telling us? What if there's an emergency? Don't you trust your own family?" My dad was even worse. He called me selfish and ungrateful, saying, "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By shutting out your own sister when she needs help." I tried explaining that this wasn't about not wanting to help Emily. It was about her repeatedly violating my boundaries after I'd asked her to stop. I told them I was happy to give them a new emergency key, but only if they promised it would be used solely for actual emergencies. Their response shocked me. My dad said, "We're not making that promise. Families should have access to each other. Emily is struggling with college, and if your apartment helps her, you should be grateful to contribute." When I stood my ground, my mom started crying, saying I was tearing the family apart over something so trivial. My sister texted me a long message about how I was being controlling and possessive over just an apartment. The guilt tripping is intense, and even some extended family members have reached out to tell me I'm being unreasonable. But I don't think I am. This is my personal space that I pay for. I'm not refusing to help my sister. I'm just asking for basic respect and courtesy. Am I really the bad guy here? Should I just give in and hand over a new key with no restrictions? Update 2. The family intervention that backfired. It's been about 2 weeks since I changed my locks, and the situation with my family has gone from bad to worse. Last Sunday, my mom texted asking me to come over for dinner. She said they wanted to talk things through calmly and find a solution that worked for everyone. I was skeptical but decided to go, hoping we could actually have a rational conversation. I should have known better. When I arrived, it wasn't just my parents and Emily waiting for me. My Aunt Karen and Uncle Thomas were there too, along with my grandparents. It was a full-blown family intervention. As soon as I sat down, the ambush began. My mom started with, "We're all here because we're concerned about how you've been treating your sister." One by one, they took turns explaining why I was being unreasonable. My dad emphasized how family should always come first. My Aunt Karen shared stories about how her brothers had always let her use their apartments when she was in college. My grandpa talked about sacrifice and family loyalty. Emily sat there looking smug, occasionally adding comments like, "I just don't understand why you're being so selfish about this." When I finally got a chance to speak, I calmly explained that this wasn't about not wanting to help Emily. It was about respecting basic boundaries. I reminded them that I had previously offered to let Emily use my apartment when she needed it. She just needed to ask permission first. "But that's so inconvenient," Emily interrupted. "Sometimes I need a place last minute, or you don't respond to texts right away." My mom nodded in agreement. "See? She's not trying to impose. She just needs flexibility." That's when I realized they fundamentally didn't respect my right to privacy or control over my own living space. I stood up and said, "I'm willing to help Emily when I can, but my apartment is my personal space. I need you all to respect that." My dad's face turned red. "That's not how family works, James. You don't get to set conditions on helping your sister." The conversation devolved quickly after that. My aunt suggested I was being influenced by selfish individualistic thinking, and that, in our family, we share. My grandma started crying about how we were drifting apart as a family. I finally had enough and left, despite their protests. The guilt-tripping text messages started before I even got to my car. When I got home, I found an email from my dad with the subject line, "A proposal." He suggested that since I was being difficult, maybe Emily could just move in with me officially. His reasoning: "My place is closer to her college, I have the space, it's a one-bedroom apartment, and it would teach me to be less selfish." I didn't even respond. Instead, I reached out to a therapist a friend recommended. I had my first session yesterday, and it was eye-opening. The therapist explained concepts like enmeshment and family systems that helped me understand why my family reacts so strongly to my attempts at setting boundaries. I'm still standing firm on the locked door policy. I've told Emily she's welcome to visit or even stay occasionally, but only with advance notice and my explicit permission. So far, she's refusing to agree to those terms, and my parents are still pressuring me to stop this nonsense. It's exhausting, but I'm not backing down. This is my home, and I deserve to have my boundaries respected. Update 3. The unexpected ally and the escalation. It's been about a month since my last update, and a lot has happened. Some good, some bad, but I'm starting to see the light at the end of this very strange family tunnel. First, the unexpected good news. My older cousin Michael reached out to me privately after hearing about the family intervention from my aunt. I was prepared for another lecture, but instead, he shared that he'd gone through something similar with his parents a few years ago and offered his support. "Your apartment is your space," he told me. "Don't let them convince you that having boundaries makes you a bad person or a bad brother." Having someone in the family actually validate my feelings was more emotional than I expected. Michael even offered to talk to my parents, but I decided to handle this myself. Now for the not-so-good news. After my refusal to hand over a new key, Emily and my parents escalated their tactics. It started with daily guilt-tripping messages, Emily had to study at the noisy library today because you wouldn't let her use your quiet apartment, or Emily had to spend money on an Uber at 11 p.m. because she couldn't crash at your place after her late class. When that didn't work, they tried financial leverage. My dad called to remind me that they had helped with part of my security deposit when I first moved in, about $400 of the $1,500 total. He strongly implied that if I didn't give Emily unrestricted access to my apartment, I should pay them back immediately. I was shocked but decided to take the power away from this threat. I transferred the $400 to my dad's account the next day with a note, repayment of security deposit loan. Thank you for helping me when I moved in. This seemed to stun them into silence for about 2 days. Then came the next level, showing up unannounced. Last Friday evening, I was relaxing at home when someone started pounding on my door. It was Emily, looking upset, with our mom right behind her. "We need to talk about this ridiculous situation," my mom said as she tried to push past me into the apartment. I stood my ground and didn't let them in, suggesting we could talk at the coffee shop down the street instead. This infuriated my mom, who couldn't believe I would leave them standing in the hallway like strangers. "We are strangers to this apartment," I replied. "You don't live here." That comment led to a hallway argument where my mom accused me of being brainwashed by individualism, and Emily cried about how I was choosing an apartment over my own sister. Eventually they left, but not before my mom warned that this isn't over. She was right. The next escalation came in the form of Emily's emergency. On Sunday night, I got a panicked call from my sister claiming she was locked out of our parents' house, had no way to get in, and needed a place to stay urgently. Concerned, I agreed to let her come over. When she arrived, I quickly realized there was no emergency. She was perfectly calm, had clearly planned this visit, she had an overnight bag packed, and even admitted that our parents weren't actually out of town as she'd claimed. "I just needed to talk to you without everyone involved," she explained. "And I knew you wouldn't let me in otherwise." I was furious but kept my cool. We had a long conversation where I tried, again, to explain why her behavior was inappropriate. She finally seemed to listen when I asked how she would feel if I just walked into her room whenever I wanted, used her things without asking, and invited strangers to hang out there when she wasn't home. "That's different," she started to say, but then stopped herself. "Well, I guess I wouldn't like it." It felt like a small breakthrough. She agreed that going forward, she would text me before coming over and would stop bringing friends without permission. However, she still insisted that she should have a key for convenience. I held firm, no key without respect for boundaries. She left disappointed but less angry than before. I thought we might be making progress, but then yesterday my parents called to say they want to have a family meeting with a mediator, their pastor from church. Apparently, this situation is now serious enough to require spiritual intervention. I've agreed to meet, mostly because I'm curious to see if an outside perspective might help them understand my position. The meeting is scheduled for this weekend, and I'm preparing myself for another battle in this bizarre war over my right to basic privacy. Update 4. The mediation, the truth, and moving forward. The mediation with my family and their pastor happened last weekend, and it didn't go at all the way my parents expected. In fact, it turned out to be exactly what this situation needed, just not for the reasons they thought. Pastor Robert is a soft-spoken man in his 60s who has known our family for years. When my parents suggested him as a mediator, I was skeptical. I figured he'd automatically take their side about family obligations and honoring thy father and mother. I couldn't have been more wrong. We gathered in a small meeting room at the church on Saturday morning. My parents and Emily sat on one side of the table, I sat on the other, and Pastor Robert positioned himself at the head of the table. He started by asking each of us to explain the situation from our perspective without interruption. My parents went first, painting a picture of me as selfish and uncaring, withholding help from my struggling sister over petty territorial issues. Emily followed with a tearful account of how stressed she was with college and how having access to my apartment was the one thing that made her life manageable. When my turn came, I calmly explained the actual timeline of events, how I had always been willing to help Emily, how she had repeatedly violated my boundaries by entering my apartment without permission, taking my things, and even allowing strangers in when I wasn't home. I explained how I'd tried multiple times to establish reasonable boundaries, only to be dismissed and overruled. I also brought evidence, something my family clearly wasn't expecting. I showed text messages where Emily had admitted to letting friends stay at my place without asking, photos of my belongings that had been damaged or never returned, and even screenshots of social media posts where Emily had bragged about having a free crash pad in the city. Pastor Robert listened carefully to everyone and then did something remarkable. He sided with me completely. "From what I'm hearing," he said gently, "James has been more than generous with his space and possessions. He's not refusing to help his sister. He's simply asking for basic respect and courtesy. That seems entirely reasonable to me." My parents looked stunned. My father started to object, but Pastor Robert continued. "Let me ask you something," he said to my parents. "When James was Emily's age, did you allow him unrestricted access to your home and possessions? Did you let him bring friends over without your knowledge when you weren't home?" My parents shifted uncomfortably. "That's different," my mom said. "We're the parents. And James is an adult with his own home," Pastor Robert replied. "The principle is the same. We all deserve respect for our boundaries, regardless of family relationships." He turned to Emily next. "Young lady, how would you feel if James entered your bedroom without permission, took your things, and let his friends use your space when you weren't there?" Emily looked down at the table. "I wouldn't like it," she admitted quietly. The conversation continued for almost 2 hours. My parents tried several more arguments: family obligation, the concept of sharing, even bringing up how they had sacrificed everything for us kids. But Pastor Robert gently redirected each attempt, consistently reinforcing that boundaries are healthy and necessary in all relationships, even family ones. By the end of the session, something had shifted. My dad, never one to admit he's wrong, at least acknowledged that perhaps there needed to be clearer communication about expectations. My mom conceded that maybe Emily had taken advantage a bit. And Emily, most surprisingly, actually apologized. "I guess I didn't think about how it would feel from your perspective," she said. "I was just focused on what was convenient for me." We left with a new agreement. Emily could come over if she texted first and received explicit permission. No more unannounced visits, no more borrowing without asking, and absolutely no bringing friends over when I'm not home. Most importantly, no demands for a key. For a few days, it seemed like we had reached a resolution. Emily texted before coming over, didn't touch my things without asking, and was generally respectful of my space. My parents stopped bringing up the key issue. Then yesterday, I discovered what had really been going on all along. My cousin Michael called to give me a heads up about something he'd overheard at a family dinner I hadn't attended. Apparently, Emily has been seeing a guy my parents strongly disapprove of. They don't want her dating him, but can't explicitly forbid it since she's 20. When they found out she was using my apartment for privacy with him, they were actually relieved. They preferred that to her going to his place, which they considered unsafe. That's why they were so adamant about her having unrestricted access to my apartment. They weren't just enabling Emily's entitlement. They were using my space as a way to maintain some illusion of control over her dating life. When I confronted my parents about this, they were defensive at first but eventually admitted it was true. "We were just trying to protect her," my mom said. "We thought she'd be safer at your place than elsewhere." I was furious. "So you were fine with her violating my privacy and bringing a guy you don't even trust into my home, without my knowledge or consent?" The conversation that followed was tense but surprisingly productive. For the first time, my parents seemed to truly understand why their actions were inappropriate. They apologized, not just for the recent situation, but for consistently disrespecting my boundaries. As for Emily, when I talked to her privately about this, she broke down crying. She admitted she'd been using my apartment partly to see her boyfriend away from our parents' watchful eyes. "I didn't think you'd understand," she said. "And it was just easier to take the key than to have that conversation." I told her I might have been willing to help if she'd been honest and respectful, but her approach had destroyed my trust. We're now working on rebuilding that trust, slowly. She's accepted that she won't be getting a key anytime soon, but I've agreed to let her use my apartment occasionally when she genuinely needs a quiet place to study, provided she asks properly first. My parents have finally stopped pressuring me about the key situation. I think seeing an authority figure they respect take my side helped them recognize how unreasonable they were being. They've promised to respect my boundaries going forward, though I'm keeping my expectations realistic. As for me, this whole experience has been exhausting but illuminating. I've learned a lot about standing up for myself, even when it feels easier to give in. I've discovered that having boundaries doesn't make me a bad family member. In fact, it makes our relationships healthier. My apartment is still my sanctuary. The locks remain unchanged. And while I'm more than willing to help my family when I can, I now know that I can do so on terms that respect my own needs and boundaries. That, I think, is what actual family support looks like.